The silence in the solicitor's office was heavier than any coffin lid. It pressed down, thick with unspoken expectations and the scent of old paper and polished mahogany. I sat across from my husband, his hand resting on mine, a gesture that felt more like a restraint than comfort, a subtle pressure that kept me anchored to the sterile reality of the room. My daughter-in-law, Sarah, perched on the edge of her plush leather chair, her meticulously styled hair catching the dim, filtered light that seeped through the heavy velvet curtains. The solicitor, a man whose face seemed carved from a lifetime of dispensing legal pronouncements, cleared his throat, a small, insignificant sound in the vast quiet, a punctuation mark before the unfolding of destiny. He began to read. My father-in-law, Arthur, a man of quiet dignity and even quieter wealth, had left behind a surprisingly straightforward will. Most of it was predictable, the distribution of his worldly goods following the well-trodden paths of familial affection and civic responsibility. There were generous sums designated for his grandchildren, a substantial donation to his favorite historical society, and a thoughtful bequest to his elderly sister, Margaret, who lived in a small cottage by the sea. Then, the solicitor's voice shifted, a subtle modulation that signaled a change, a deviation from the expected. He read my name, followed by a specific property, the cottage by the lake, the place where I'd spent summers of my childhood, the place where Arthur and I had often spoken of my retirement, the place that held the echoes of my earliest laughter. It was more than just a house, it was a legacy of memories, a tangible thread woven through the tapestry of my life. And then, Sarah's turn. To Sarah Thompson, my son's wife, the solicitor read, his voice steady, devoid of inflection, a professional detachment that belied the weight of his words. I leave, and he named a sum, significant, certainly, a figure that represented a comfortable cushion for most, but not life-altering in the grand scheme of Arthur's considerable estate. It was the way it was stated, the deliberate placement, the implication of just this after the substantial inheritance for me, that hung in the air, a palpable thing. Sarah's eyes, which had been fixed on the solicitor's face with an almost predatory intensity, the intensity of a hawk spotting its prey, flickered towards me. A small, almost imperceptible smile played on her lips, a fleeting shadow that hinted at deeper currents. It was a smile that said she'd expected more. Much more. A silent declaration of perceived injustice. The reading concluded, and the formal pleasantries that followed, the polite murmurs of appreciation and the necessary legal confirmations, felt hollow, like the superficial gloss on a much deeper dissatisfaction. As we stood to leave, the heavy weight of the will's contents settling onto our shoulders, Sarah turned to me, her voice suddenly sharp, cutting through the professional politeness like a shard of glass. Honestly, she began, her tone dripping with an insincere sweetness, the kind that curdles on the tongue. I thought Uncle Arthur would have been more generous. Especially considering all the sacrifices I've made. Sacrifices. I'd known Sarah for 10 years, had observed her meticulously curated life, her unwavering focus on material comfort and social standing. Her primary sacrifice, as I saw it, seemed to be tolerating my son, Liam, whom she often referred to dismissively in private, a whispered complaint about his perceived lack of ambition or his less-than-designer attire. My husband, Liam's father, bless his well-meaning heart, a man who always sought the path of least resistance and preferred to smooth over any ruffles, tried to interject, a gentle, placating sound in his throat. Sarah, now, but Sarah waved him away with a dismissive flick of her perfectly manicured hand. It's not about the money, really, she continued, her gaze locking onto mine, a deliberate, piercing intensity. It's about the principle. Some people just get lucky, don't they? Inheriting things without ever having to lift a finger. The implication was clear, a direct accusation wrapped in faux martyrdom, a carefully constructed narrative of victimhood. She believed I hadn't earned my inheritance, that I was somehow undeserving, a recipient of unearned privilege. She saw the cottage, the place of my childhood dreams and my future aspirations, as hers by right, as something she should have had a claim to, perhaps because she was younger, perhaps because she was the current wife, the inheritor of my son's future, and therefore, by extension, Arthur's. The quiet dignity of my father-in-law's final wishes, his meticulous thought and measured generosity, was being twisted into a public display of her entitlement, a spoiled child's tantrum over perceived slights. I felt a prickle of something cold and sharp beneath. My carefully constructed calm, a feeling that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. For years, I'd navigated the subtle slights, the passive-aggressive comments, the dismissive attitude Sarah often displayed towards me, a constant low hum of disapproval. I'd swallowed my pride, prioritized my son's happiness above all else, and maintained a facade of familial harmony, believing that a peaceful home was the most precious inheritance I could bestow upon Liam. But in that moment, hearing her speak so brazenly, so ungratefully, so publicly, something shifted. The years of polite endurance, of letting things slide, of swallowing unspoken grievances, felt suddenly foolish, a waste of precious emotional energy. My father-in-law, a man who appreciated quiet strength, subtle gestures, and unswerving integrity, would never have approved of this display of blatant avarice and manufactured victimhood. He would have seen it for what it was, a lack of grace. My husband, sensing the palpable tension, the subtle shift in the air from polite formality to open discord, steered me gently towards the door. Sarah followed, her monologue continuing, a relentless stream of grievances about how she would have managed the cottage, how much she would have appreciated it, as if her imagined stewardship held more merit than my actual lifelong connection. I walked out of the solicitor's office with a leaden feeling in my gut, the weight of the unspoken words and the raw emotion clinging to me like damp fabric. But beneath that discomfort, a dawning clarity began to emerge. I wouldn't engage. I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of a public scene, of watching me crumble under her manufactured outrage. My resolve solidified with each step away from the imposing building. The cottage. It wasn't just a property, it was my refuge. My sanctuary. It was the place where I'd learned to skip stones, where I'd felt the warmth of the sun on my skin as I read for hours on end, where I'd shared hushed secrets with my childhood best friend. And Sarah's words, her venomous insinuations, had poisoned the very air around it, tarnishing its serene image with her discontent. I didn't call her. I didn't text her. I simply started making plans, quiet, deliberate plans, designed not for confrontation, but for a subtle, undeniable assertion of my rightful claim. The first step was quiet, almost imperceptible, a whisper in the vast network of real estate. I contacted the estate agent who managed my father-in-law's other properties, a discreet woman named Mrs. Gable, who had always respected Arthur's privacy and his meticulous attention to detail. I explained my situation, my desire to manage the cottage myself for the time being, to tend to its needs and to enjoy its quietude. And then, with a carefully phrased request, I discreetly inquired about the possibility of installing a more robust security system and upgrading the external lighting. It wasn't about keeping Sarah out, not yet. It was about reclaiming a sense of control, about reinforcing the boundaries of my sanctuary, about preparing it for a period of quiet enjoyment, unmarred by external pressures. I paid for it myself, of course, an investment in peace of mind. The next step was less about physical action and more about subtle redirection, a strategic repositioning of the narrative. Sarah, it turned out, was quite adept at social media, a master of cultivating an online persona that projected an image of a cultured, sophisticated woman. She loved to share photos of her latest acquisitions, her exotic holidays, her meticulously decorated home, each post a carefully curated window into a life of apparent ease and exquisite taste. I started following her. Not with malicious intent, not with any desire to uncover dirt or to orchestrate a downfall, but with a quiet observer's eye, a strategic understanding of her preferred methods of communication and influence. I wanted to understand the battlefield she had chosen. When the first family gathering after the will reading was announced, a casual barbecue at my son Liam's place, a well-intentioned attempt by my husband to foster normalcy, Sarah was, of course, present, radiating an air of patient suffering, a martyr at her own feast. She spent the afternoon subtly hinting about her disappointment and how she was making do, her pronouncements delivered with a sigh and a wistful glance towards an unseen horizon. My son, caught between us, a young man still learning the complexities of adult relationships and familial obligations, looked increasingly uncomfortable, his gaze darting between his mother and his wife. Then, it was time. I didn't make a grand announcement. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't issue ultimatums or declarations of war. I simply started posting. Not about Sarah, not about the will, not about the perceived injustices, but about the cottage. I posted pictures of the wildflowers blooming by T. He Lake, a vibrant tapestry of purples and yellows against the deep green of the surrounding woods. I shared short videos of the sun setting over the water, the sky ablaze with hues of orange and pink, the dappled light dancing on the old wooden deck. I wrote simple, understated captions, a quiet afternoon by the water, the peace I needed, finding solace in familiar landscapes. I tagged the general location, the county, and perhaps the nearest town, but not directly, just enough for those who knew to understand, enough for the whispers to begin. Sarah, of course, saw these posts. Her carefully constructed narrative of disappointment, of a life unfulfilled due to perceived injustices, began to crumble in the face of my quiet contentment. She had expected me to be miserable, to be struggling with my inheritance, to be somehow burdened by it, a cautionary tale of undeserved good fortune. Instead, I was thriving. I was enjoying the very thing she felt entitled to, the place that represented a tangible symbol of Arthur's affection and appreciation for me. My happiness became a subtle, yet powerful, refutation of her claims. The social consequences began to ripple outwards, not with loud accusations or dramatic pronouncements, but with murmurs, with gentle inquiries that carried a sting of unspoken judgment. My son's aunt, Margaret, Arthur's sister, a woman who had always been fond of me and remembered my childhood summers at the cottage with a warmth that belied her age, mentioned to my husband how lovely it was that I was enjoying the cottage so much, and how it was so generous of Arthur to leave it to me. My sister-in-law, Sarah's former ally in many family discussions, the one who often echoed Sarah's complaints, started asking more questions about the cottage's history, about my childhood memories there, inadvertently highlighting Sarah's lack of genuine connection to the place, her absence from its past. The more she delved into my personal history with the cottage, the more Sarah's own claims seemed to lack substance. During the next few weeks, any mention of the cottage in Sarah's presence was met with a strained silence, a palpable awkwardness that filled the room. Her carefully cultivated air of being wronged, of being the victim of Arthur's perceived stinginess, began to feel hollow, exposed. She couldn't argue with the evidence of my happiness, the serene images that painted a picture of a fulfilled life, a life enriched by a beloved inheritance. Her attempts to garner sympathy now felt manufactured, theatrical. She had wanted me to be defined by her dissatisfaction, to be a reflection of her own unhappiness. Instead, I became defined by my quiet joy, my renewed connection to a cherished place. The final shift, the undeniable turning of the tide, came at my son's birthday dinner. Sarah, as usual, made a veiled comment about people who have everything, a thinly disguised jab aimed directly at me. This time, however, my husband, instead of trying to placate her, of offering his usual mediating platitudes, simply smiled and said, his voice calm and clear, "Yes, it's wonderful that she's found such peace and happiness at the cottage. Arthur would have loved that." He then turned to me, his eyes warm with shared understanding, and asked, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, "Did you happen to see those heron chicks by the south bank today?" The question, innocent on its face, was a subtle dismissal of Sarah's complaint, a gentle redirection of focus. It drew attention away from her manufactured grievance, her need for validation, and back to the shared beauty of the place she felt she deserved but had never truly appreciated. The specific details of nature, the observation of life within the sanctuary, underscored my connection to it, a connection that transcended mere ownership. Sarah's face flushed, a telltale sign of her discomfort. Her eyes darted around the table, searching for allies, for any sign of support for her narrative, but finding only polite indifference, a subtle turning away. Her entitlement, so potent, so overwhelming in the sterile environment of the solicitor's office, withered under the warmth of genuine connection, the quiet truth of my contentment, and the simple, understated affirmation from my husband. She had demanded, I had refused to engage in her game, and the consequence was not her anger, but her sudden, uncomfortable irrelevance. The cottage remained mine, not just in ownership, but in spirit, a quiet testament to a love she had never understood, a sanctuary reclaimed, its peace undisturbed.